Test, test. Good. There we go. All right, the Subcommittee on Oversight and Accountability will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the fiscal year 24 State Department Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Accessibility budget. And I now recognize myself for an opening statement. What we are discussing is the budget of the office that is essentially the filter for all hiring and retention at the State Department, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility. I believe that this office has a clever name that uses strong emotional words, diversity, equity, inclusion, but functionally does the opposite of what America has always stood for, which is very simply the best man, the best woman for the job. And I believe that because of what I've heard from this office, what I have read from this office, and what I hear about this office from employees at the State Department, that instead of simply looking for the best man or woman for the job, this office is giving people the impression, or given many people outside of the State Department the sense that it is looking for a preferred race, or at minimum not white, that it is looking for a preferred religion, or at minimum not Christian, or that it is looking for a preferred sexual orientation or identity, or at minimum not straight male. This office tries to justify what I have literally heard people call bigotry by saying the State Department needs to look more like America. Let me be clear in my beliefs. No part of our government, including the State Department, should look any certain way. It should reflect hard work, loyalty to America, patience, willingness to sacrifice, a sense of duty, consistency, honor, discipline, confidence. Those are the traits that all hiring should be based on. To hire or not hire, to promote or not promote, based in any part upon appearance is wrong and un-American. Before Joe Biden was sworn into office, before he was even elected, he made the decision that he would hire based on race, gender, and sexual orientation. He said, "I'll appoint the first black woman to the Supreme Court." He pledged, "I commit that I will pick a woman to be vice president." There's nothing wrong with appointing a black woman to the Supreme Court or as a candidate for vice president. But there is something fundamentally wrong by saying, if you look Latino, if you look Asian, if you look Native American, if you look white or male, then you need not apply. My life has been heavily influenced by my time in combat. Thank God that we did not have a DEIA officer in my platoon. The only requirement every day was to be the best. And if you weren't, then you go back to the needs of the Army. It was that simple, and we ranked among the United States Army's most effective, committed, and lethal forces. And I could say that about my colleague to my left as well. Today we have before us Ambassador Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the State Department. Ma'am, I believe that your office is mandating division within the State Department. I could spend the next 2 hours sharing the statements that you've made or that your office has made, but I'm going to give just a couple of the highlights. Diversity includes everything. The purpose is not simply to put another group at the top of the pyramid, but visible diversity is necessary, but insufficient. Another quote, "This is a European-American burden to get rid of this poison." Another quote, "We have to call spades spades, primarily European-American men. That is who have the vast majority of senior positions, and that does not come about through merit." Another quote, when you're putting together panels of officers to consider for positions, that list better be diverse. You said that we need to try to level the playing field to get more candidates from a wider variety of backgrounds. State Department, as a result, has decided to do away with the requirement to pass the Foreign Service Officer test. You literally do not have to pass the FSO test to become an FSO. I would ask somebody to name to me another profession where you can fail the qualifying exam and still get the job. By the way, I have read practice FSO tests, and the information questioned and given in there is not unimportant information. In my opinion, you have made diversity, or as I will call it, identity, a core precept for Foreign Service officers that is equal to their ability to demonstrate leadership. So leadership is as important as how you identify. You've decided that a key factor for promotion at the State Department is how well an individual falls in line with that agenda. If an employee uses the wrong pronouns, good luck getting promoted. Instead, you're going to get a mark on your record. The supporting information of this, it's stated in the DEIA strategic plan, saying this: establishing the advancement of DEIA as an element for all employees as a part of their job performance criteria, their career advancement opportunities, and senior performance pay. That's DEIA as an element for all employees. Ma'am, I know that you want good people working for the State Department, but to require that those good people first look a certain way, it's not what I fought for. It's certainly not what I have friends of any color that have died for. And in that, I look forward to hearing your comments in response to what I brought up and what other members of this committee will bring up. In that, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Crow for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Mast. Well, I had some prepared remarks here, but I'm not going to read those because, frankly, I was so appalled by the chairman's opening remarks, I need to address it. Those who want to talk about merit also want to ignore history of this country. They want to ignore the fact that the playing field is not level for vast swaths of our country, because that is not a convenient fact for them, right? They want to talk about merit as if our history and the institutional barriers that exist for vast swaths of our country don't exist, but they do. We need to have an honest conversation here about the value of diversity, about the barriers that exist for vast swaths of our country, and how we can realize our full potential in every respect. And that's the conversation that I look forward to and am anxious to have. None of this is a box-checking exercise. I don't view the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, I don't view the role of the first ever Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and certainly not your very long and important and incredible career, Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, as anything tantamount to how it was characterized by the chairman just now. I, too, served in combat. I led a platoon of paratroopers in the invasion of Iraq, and it was a platoon that represented this country. Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, straight, gay, rich, poor, rural kids, urban kids, farmers, ranchers. We came from everywhere. And when we came together and tapped into the full strength of that diversity, we were greater than the sum of our parts. We were a team that trusted each other, that fought together, that survived together, that represented America, and is an illustration that when we do tap into our full strength and potential as a nation, we are at our best. So no, this is not a box-checking exercise. Whether we're talking about our national security, whether we're talking about our foreign policy, or we're talking about our diplomacy, we do not serve the American people unless we reduce institutional barriers, whether we recognize them, and whether we tap into the full talent of our nation. That's what this is about. The rest of the world sees it too. Since this is a Foreign Affairs Committee that has oversight of the State Department, let's talk about that. The way we represent ourselves to the world, the way we present ourselves to the world, and the people that we send out to represent our nation also matters. Because the world sees themselves in so many ways in America. And we have to ask ourselves, are we presenting ourselves as we are? Are we presenting all of America to the world? And if we're not, we also are not realizing our full potential. We also are not putting our best foot forward. That's what this is about. And I will not allow this to be pulled into the weeds, to try to become a game of gotcha. There is a broader conversation that can and must be had today and every day about the important role of this office, about the important work that you do, and I am ready and willing to have that. Chairman, I yield back.
Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished witness before us today on this important topic. The Honorable Gina Abercrombie-Winstanley is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the U.S. Department of State. Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley has served as a diplomat for 30 years, and prior to her current role, she was U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Malta, Foreign Policy Advisor to the Commander of the U.S. Cyber Forces, and Deputy Coordinator for Counterterrorism. Thank you for being here today. Your full statement will be made part of the record, and I'll ask that you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes. I now recognize Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and esteemed members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the work of my office and the Department of State's proposed FY 2024 budget for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, or DEIA. As the State Department's first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, I believe our nation's values of inclusion, equity, and our diversity contribute to our national strength. They are a comparative advantage for our engagement and leadership throughout the world. I'm proud of what my team and I have been able to accomplish so far. As I prepare to transition, I'm optimistic about the future, and I anticipate that my successor, yet to be named, will build on our achievements. As you know, Secretary Blinken has an agenda to modernize the State Department to address our national security challenges with maximum effectiveness. Our modernization efforts intend to build capacity and expertise in critical mission areas, encourage innovation, modernize technology and data usage, reinvigorate our relationship with risk, and recruit, retain, and empower a diverse workforce. The Biden-Harris administration believes diversity of thought, background, perspective, and lived experience must be at the policymaking table. As we work to achieve our modernization goals, I focused on transparency, inclusion, and accountability. So let me start with transparency. We cannot achieve merit-based advancement without data. I have worked to create a quantitative and qualitative baseline for the department against which to measure future progress. We must make evidence-informed decisions. My office has now published a demographic baseline report that provides an unprecedented look at our bureaus, broken down by race, ethnicity, gender, status of disability, grade, rank, and job series skill code. We plan to release an updated report annually to show trend lines. Now that we have a better sense of who we are, we can better ensure that we tap the best and brightest among all Americans to represent this great nation. We intend to attract, hire, promote, and retain talent and remove barriers that might keep some from rising as far as their abilities can take them. This goal is widely shared by our workforce and Congress. I thank you for your leadership and support in improving DEIA, and note that our goal is to fully implement congressional intent. My office sponsored a survey last year in which almost 9,000 employees participated, a full third of our direct hires. Their top recommendation was to focus on removing barriers to merit-based advancement. We're now conducting 3 barrier analyses to inform possible procedural changes. Second, let me address inclusion. To create a more effective work environment, our civil and foreign service personnel are now evaluated in part by how their work helps advance transparency, inclusion, or accountability. We also developed a policy to counter discriminatory treatment of our U.S. employees abroad. For example, when employees experience discrimination abroad by foreign customs and immigration officials, our missions must now report it to the department and protest it to the host nation government. Thanks to the work of this committee, we have also successfully converted select internship programs to paid internships. This is another big win for inclusion. There are many young Americans across the country who cannot afford to offer free labor to the department. To support greater accessibility, we changed the typeface used by the department to one that is more accessible to those who are visually impaired. And finally, accountability. In the survey I referenced, too many of our employees reported discrimination, harassment, or bullying, and little confidence that department would address it. We intend to fix that. We intend to take on toxic conduct. And we've eliminated the confidentiality clause in settlement cases where many employees felt it was akin to a gag order that served to protect those who they allege had harassed or discriminated against them. Finally, let me turn to the budget that supports our efforts. Until recently, the department did not track DEIA spending and only established a budget code for DEIA in 2023. The department has a comprehensive DEIA budget request for FY 2024 of just over $76 million. 90% of the request is spread across other bureaus. My office closely coordinates with the entire department to successfully implement the initiatives and ensure that there is no duplication of effort. A little under 10% of that funding will go to my office. With that budget, we'll fund our barrier analyses, travel, demographic baseline reports, and special reports on thematic issues. It also includes our small project initiatives, which fund projects that advance DEIA domestically or abroad, and would allow me to also increase my staff from 12 to 14 positions. I want to express my thanks in advance for your broad support for the department's workforce and our mission, as well as my work to advance transparency, inclusion, and accountability. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and respond to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. I'm just going to start by responding to my colleague, who's somebody that I thank. I thank you for your service. If I can speak to you directly, I thank you for your service. Very proud to call you a brother in arms. But as I observe our units, we both served in diverse units in the military, but it was never by demand. And that is the argument that I'm bringing up here as we talk about service in the State Department or the military or anywhere else. There are no quotas over qualification. We didn't need an African American or an Asian or a white sniper or bomb tech or canine handler. It was just simply who raised their hand, volunteered, proved that they had what they needed to make it and be effective in that role, and pursued it and reached their goal. That's what it was all about. And to give the appearance at any time that it is anything other than that, that is un-American, and that is the problem I have with the appearance that this office is giving. I'll ask a couple of questions here. Is baldness, somebody that looks like me, does that make you a better diplomat, ma'am? I think I know the answer, but.
Not that I know of.
It doesn't. If somebody's 5'8" like me or 6'3" like somebody else, does it make them a better diplomat?
No, I do not believe so.
Likewise, does being white make somebody a better diplomat?
No, I do not believe so.
African American,
No, I do not believe so.
Asian or Islander,
Any specific group?
Native American? It doesn't. I would ask this. Can you tell me, am I white?
I would allow you to tell me how you characterize yourself.
That's exactly right. I would have to tell you not just how I characterize myself, but what I am. But I'm asking, do you know if I'm white,
I do not know.
half black,
I do not know.
Asian, Islander,
Do not know.
brown, Latino?
I do not know.
You can't know. You can't know without asking somebody to disclose what they are. And we can't ask what somebody is, and it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter that I'm half Mexican. It shouldn't matter whether I'm able-bodied or ambulatory or not ambulatory. That doesn't have anything to do with what my background is, that I served in these operations in the military, that I gained these skills, that I studied this in school, that I proved that I could pass whatever tests under stress and duress and be effective in the field under situations that foreign service officers might encounter, like the withdrawal of Afghanistan, the enemy at the gates, people being targeted, trying to deal with countless number of SIVs coming in. That has nothing to do with how somebody looks. It has to do with, did they volunteer to do this? Do they have the skills to do this? Did we test them to make sure they had the skills to do this? Do we hire hard and have the ability to manage a little bit easier? And that's the problem with what I see with what's taking place here. I'd ask you another question. Can you tell me what best looks like?
I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what you're getting at.
What
with
does the best candidate look like?
Yeah.
The best FSO officer, we'll use that, the best foreign service officer. What does the best look like?
I would say the best for the particular job can look like any one of us, and that is the American way. That's what we support.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So in that, we can't have it be that first we look for a diverse basket of candidates, as is your quote, and then after we look for the diverse basket, then we check the merit of that. The diversity can't be the number one. I want a diverse workforce. I'm glad that I served with a diverse force in the military, diverse colleagues as members of Congress. But that can't be the number one filter, because it does create an inherent bias, an inherent quota system, where people look at it and say, well, I wasn't this. I didn't have the right religion or color or what they were looking for. So I didn't make that diverse basket number one, as you said, that it has to be that. They better bring you a diverse panel. My time has expired. In that, I now recognize Ranking Member Crow for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with the Chairman that it shouldn't matter what you look like, that it shouldn't matter if you're bald or 5'8" or 5'9" or black or white, or it shouldn't. But in the United States of America, too often it does. That's just the reality, right? And our history doesn't really have a big history of systematic discrimination against bald people or people that are 5'8". But it does against people of color. That is just the truth. All of this is about reducing those barriers. It's not about favoring one side or the other. It's about recognizing our history, recognizing that all things have not been equal, recognizing, with all due respect, Mr. Chairman, that we do not exist in a perfect situation where what you outlined is true, because it's not. in that not everybody has access. And if we are going to be our best, then we have to have a level playing field, and we have to provide everybody with access. And then, if that level playing field exists and everybody has access, then we can find the best. But we can't do that right now. And that is the charge of these efforts. So in that vein, Ambassador, I'd like you to just explain very briefly some of the changes that I believe have been unfairly characterized to the change in the Foreign Service Officer test in the hiring process. Because some people will say that it used to be the case that applicants just had to go through the Foreign Service Officer test, and then they would pass that gate, and then look at other criteria. But now we've actually broadened the aperture, is my understanding. We look at more factors, which actually increases the pool of applicants, which seems like a good thing to me. Is that accurate, and can you describe that for us, please?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And if I may respond to the chairman's comments as well, that is exactly what has happened. We have broadened the aperture to allow more Americans to have access to the ability to serve, which is really what we want. I think it's really important that we keep in mind that how one gets into the Foreign Service has changed multiple times over years. This is not the first change. Throughout all of these changes, we need to keep in mind the reality is that there are many people already in the Department of State before this latest change who never took the written exam, never took it, but are not questioned about it because people assume that they have. We have a number of fellowship programs, including Presidential Management Fellows, Boren Fellows, AAAS Fellows, mid-level program that allows people to come into the Foreign Service over time. No one touched the written exam to become a Foreign Service officer, and these people have had successful careers as Foreign Service officers. So the written test has never been the be-all, end-all of who is going to be a successful diplomat. A former boss of mine contacted me last week, talked about his incoming class and how he had to take the Foreign Service written exam a few times before coming in, and his roommate passed it on the first try, but mustered out within 2 years of joining the Department of State. One of the barrier analyses we may need to do is who comes in which way and what their careers look like. Some of the barrier analyses that we're doing are going to follow career paths over time to see are there barriers to success in the Foreign Service based on demographics. But how you come in may be something we should look at so that we can answer the question for those who have concerns that the change in the Foreign Service written test may lower our standards. But again, already many people have come in without taking that test. I've heard no questions about them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. My time is expiring, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. I now recognize Mr. Issa for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning.
I want to follow up right where we left off there. Who made the decision to essentially jettison the requirement for the Foreign Service exam?
Jettison is...
Okay. Did you participate in the decision that led to this change?
It is not something I participated in at all, but fully support, and it's good to see you, sir.
Good to see you. It's been a long time since Malta.
Yeah.
On my way to Libya.
Yeah.
But I want to ask, because this is one of the things that bothers me sometimes about government bureaucracies. One, it's a big decision. There should be transparency, I'm sure you agree, as to who made the decision and why. But following up on a couple of the last statements you made, you said we probably should, we probably should, we probably should. Mm-hmm. And Ambassador, I couldn't agree more. So the question is, why did either your department, small funding and so on, or the State Department with its many billions, why is it that you're not coming to us with a comprehensive study showing the scores on these tests historically and whether it shows better performance? does somebody who gets a minimum just as likely to succeed as somebody who maxes it? Additionally, as you know, and I'm proud to say it's a good policy of the State Department, people enter the State Department from all walks of life at all ages, sometimes even having fully retired from a first career. Do you have facts on how well they do? Lastly, I'm sure you've done a study and you know the ratio of men and women, minorities of each category who serve in the State Department. Is that correct?
Yes, we have a demographic baseline.
And does it relatively, in most cases, particularly as to African Americans and others, reflect America with some accuracy, particularly when you consider college graduation rates?
Does the number of African Americans in the State Department reflect
If you look at the number of
percentage
African Americans who graduate from college and the number of white people who graduate from college and consider them the base of all applicants, is the ratio relatively similar or not?
I would say probably not, but I'm going to take that question back because I
would appreciate
I don't
it.
want to, yeah. I'll
Yeah,
take
because,
that
and I specifically asked from the qualified pool of graduates, because I think it's extremely important that we are looking at the qualified pools, those who can pass and get a security clearance, those who have met the minimum requirements in other areas.
Although, Congressman, I have to add, of course, that you do not need a college degree to join the Foreign Service.
It sure as hell helps.
Well, it's not a requirement. I do
Okay,
want to
I'll
be clear on that.
touche.
Okay.
Lastly, and this is there's always one zinger, Ambassador, and we've known each other a long time, so I hope you'll forgive this. In 2018, the New York Times did quote you using terms like, "You knew you were among the reviled," referring to yourself relative to President Trump's administration. You were pretty harsh on him. My question to you is, does your organization now, or is it in your future, to balance essentially those who would vote for President Trump or President George W. Bush or President George H. Bush or any other relatively conservative with those who would, and I'm not saying did, it's none of our business how somebody voted per se, but do you feel you have a balance between people of a more conservative view and a people of more liberal view, and is that part of your diversity and inclusion?
So, as you know, there's no way to know who people vote for because
Except, of course, we do know, based on records that show over 90% of State Department Foreign Service people do vote in the Democrat primary, do vote for Democrats. I mean, the press has reported pretty widely that it's not 50-50 or even 60-40.
Well, that is not part of the purview of my office. We are not looking
Okay,
at
but
political
I ask
views.
you because the purview of your office can and will expand with time. I ask you to beg the question of, do you already have a inherent bias toward liberals, Democrats, overwhelmingly? And if so, is that in fact part of balancing, if you will, America? And if not, should it be? And you can answer for the record. I apologize for running over.
Okay.
But Ambassador, it is good to see you again. I wish you well in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I hardly know where to begin, but let me start by saying, as I look at your resume, it is so impressive. We are so honored and pleased to have you here and appreciate what all you've done at the State Department, and worry that if you step down, who will continue this good work within this division and in the department overall. So thank you for that. And you said that the person hasn't been appointed, but do you know who will be following in your footsteps? And how are you leaving a record for them to know what kind of an exit memo, perhaps?
I cannot say. Keep me out of trouble. However, I am leaving behind two incredible things. A fantastic staff who are informed, dedicated, and have helped bring us this far. A superb deputy who will stand in until my successor is named. and I'm leaving behind the entire workforce. Chairman Mast asked me the other day about what I was proud of. And it is that this conversation about what America stands for, about our need to level that playing field so that everyone who wants to serve our country can to the best of their abilities. That conversation is happening in offices and missions around the world, and people are thinking about how to further it, how to ensure that their colleagues can give their best, do their best. And that I leave behind, so it's not a one-woman job.
Well, thank you very much for that. They must be very proud to continue that work and to have worked with you. You know, today's questions are directed to the State Department's Office of Diversity, but this isn't new. You're seeing around the country offices of diversity and inclusion being attacked. You see them in Florida, for example, where universities that have such offices are now going to be denied state funding. This is something that's part of the whole new anti-woke or anti-everything agenda of some of those on the other side. We worked very hard last session to be sure that people with disabilities were included, not only included within the workforce of the State Department, but also in the policy of the State Department, so we could lead by example when we are dealing with other countries. Now the emphasis has shifted to LGBTQ issues. I have the GLOBE Act, which is another attempt to say the State Department needs to be like the people it represents, and it needs to set an example. When people look to us, it's not do as I say, it's do as I do, and I think that's a big improvement. You also said part of modernization was recruitment. I wanted to ask you what your ambassadors in residence are doing, or how your recruitment has expanded to include historical black colleges and minority-serving colleges. We at UNLV, where I taught for 35 years, it's one of the most diverse campuses in the country. We would like to have an ambassador in residence. We'd like to see the State Department there to do recruiting. Could you address that?
Thank you for the question. I know that we have expanded the program a bit. Obviously, it all comes down to funding. I have had the privilege of doing some recruiting myself. Every senior officer, everybody from the department should be doing it whenever we're home, and going down to a community college in Texas and doing it with the diplomat in residence who was from our Diplomatic Security Bureau. And it was fantastic to see her in action and the excitement of the young people, because you don't need a 4-year degree to join the department or even a 2-year degree. So we are doing it. I will also say that there are people like me. When I left the department in 2017, I set up my own diplomat in residence program because I wanted to make sure that we were recruiting to support the organization and to do it in the middle of the country. So I did it in Ohio. So we are figuring out how we can expand that program, but it is very active, very robust, and we're using technology to get to places that we don't have enough people to get to in person.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
You know, part of the GLOBE Act that I mentioned is to make the special envoy for human rights and LGBT rights a legislatively declared and established position. Do you think that would help the State Department both internally and with policy with other countries, and helping our own diplomats abroad who have maybe same-sex wives or are feeling discrimination from host countries because of their own policies? And we have seen that certainly even recently with discrimination. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I would certainly bow to the wisdom of Congress on that. I will say that our special representative, the current one, is doing an amazing job. I have done some programs with her and heard her speak and advocate for what we know in this nation, which is that everybody should have the same rights and privileges and responsibilities. And I've worked with prior ones, so it is an important role.
Well, thank you so much. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, like my colleague, I don't even know where to begin from a different perspective here. Ma'am, I represent one of the poorest counties in Florida. It's predominantly white. There are whole swaths that are rural, little access to internet, little access to broadband. The only county that actually declined in terms of its median income over time, and much like other counties in Middle America that have been gutted by the loss of manufacturing, that have been overrun with fentanyl, that have an opioid crisis, are these constituents of mine privileged? It's a primarily Caucasian, I guess, county. Are they privileged
I certainly
systemically?
can't speak to individuals in your
Because I have to tell you, I think where you see the pushback coming here is that people being told that they're privileged because of their skin color or because of, I guess, their ancestry from hundreds of years ago came from Europe. They don't even know. I don't even know where my ancestors came from, but am I white, as the chairman asked? You don't know, right? We have to self-identify.
You have to
All right?
self-identify.
So I think the issue is multifold. One, we're historically a country of merit. And to hold people or to provide additional resources to one group based on a skin color because of things that have happened in the past and not to another, it's a zero sum in terms of resources. So are we excluding others because of their skin color or sexual orientation or what have you, and providing those resources to other as just an underlying philosophy in your office?
Thank you for the question. No, I will absolutely agree that we are a country where our ideal has been merit. But we have many, many examples of where that's not been the case, that is not the case.
Are we systemically a racist country? Is there systemic racism in the State Department? We'll just keep it within your purview.
We certainly have policies, processes, and procedures that we have to take a hard look at to ensure that that is not the case. I will give you an example, if
sure.
I may.
Quickly, though, please.
Yes, we have changed how we do our selection of one of the most important senior positions in the department, Deputy Assistant Secretary, which is senior, an ambassador comes back to that position, someone goes from that position to be an ambassador. Until the creation of our office, where we could have a look at and review the processes, those positions were not advertised, they were not competed. You had to be in the know or known and liked by someone to have even the knowledge.
Okay,
the
so we're going to
position
compete the
was-
position. Got it.
Right, but I'm
Great.
just, oh,
What does that have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion?
because the people who traditionally have been in the know
Yeah.
are largely from a single group. It's
What group?
knowledge. According to the numbers from GAO and our own demographic baseline, the majority of senior positions in the Department of State, over 80%, are held by European Americans. Over 50% are held by men.
Am I a European American?
Is your heritage from Europe?
What's that? I actually don't know.
Okay, then I can't answer that.
I actually don't know. I can tell you that I married into a Middle Eastern family. My son is half Arab. What box does he check for your office?
So we have expanded the options for self-identifying in the Department of State. There are now 16 options that include a Middle East, North African option. So if your son comes to work for the Department of State, he
I
can
gotcha.
identify that way.
So I think we're going to continue to proliferate boxes, right, as we continue to have a interracial country. I mean, we're the melting pot.
As you know, identifying Americans has been done from almost the very beginning of our nation, since 1790.
I know at some point it has to, at some point, I don't know when it stops.
Yeah.
When are we there?
Well, I think when we get our level playing field, when people are not making decisions on what
Ma'am,
we
I don't
look
know that
like or
we'll-
what our background is,
I yield
we'll
my
be
time.
fine.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Kim for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ambassador, for coming out here. I was going to ask you a bunch of questions about the challenges of recruitment, but I have to say, I've really struggled through this through this conversation so far in this hearing. I believe I'm the only person in Congress that served in a career capacity at the State Department. And it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I had great opportunities to do assignments both domestically and abroad. I had the chance to go out to Afghanistan and serve as a civilian out there. And I remember when I returned back from my tour in Afghanistan, I was serving at the Maine State Department, and I showed up to work one day, and there was this white envelope on my keyboard, and I opened it up, and it was a letter that was now informing me that I've now been banned from working on issues related to the Korean Peninsula because I'm Korean American. And because of my family's ties still there and things like that. And it kind of struck me. I was quite shocked by it. I wasn't even trying to work on anything related to Korea. I was very happy continuing to work on the Middle East. And it was something that really made me wonder whether or not I had a future here at the State Department, whether or not I could continue on if my employer, the United States government, was questioning whether or not I would be able to adequately represent and loyally represent the United States. It made me feel like it was saying that when it came to the issues of Korea, that they didn't know what I would do. And that question of my loyalty honestly made me feel like they didn't see me as 100% American. Mm-hmm. And I remember I talked to some of my colleagues and others, and they just told me, hey, look, if you're not trying to work on Korea, just ignore it. And I've tried to figure out where I could go to remedy the situation. There was really no place at the time that I felt like I could be heard. And it made me wonder whether or not I could, I was thinking about maybe applying for a job on the 7th floor to work for the secretary or the deputy secretary, but could I even be competitive for a job if I'm not allowed to work on the issues of the Korean Peninsula, which is obviously a huge issue, but also, again, my question of my loyalty was at stake there. So I guess my question to you is I didn't feel like I had a place to go to at that time. Is your office a place that, had it been in existence at that time, a place I could have gone and sought counsel as well as try to find ways to remedy the situation?
It may well have been. Certainly, we hear from a number of colleagues from around the building on a number of issues. We do not resolve individual problems. We look after systemic issues, but
it's a place where if I raise these types of issues, you'll be able to look into it and see how we can make the State Department a place better attuned to these different challenges and also understand the perspectives that people bring. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that is correct.
There was other experience that I had when I worked abroad. I was on occasion kind of ridiculed or teased by foreign officials in foreign governments and foreign organizations that didn't think I was American, didn't think I could properly represent America, and then kind of would tease me and say, oh, maybe he could just represent the Chinatowns of America. Is that a place where I could have gone and potentially talked to somebody about how I was being treated and how we could try to work to better remedy these situations, make people feel more comfortable?
Congressman, absolutely. I'm extremely proud that we led the change of policy in the department about how missions treat this sort of behavior that many of our diplomats come across for one reason or another, because of their ethnic background, their racial background, their sexual orientation, their gender, disability, where people question their role as a U.S. diplomat. And
even domestically, I had people in the United States government, both at State Department and elsewhere, when I talked about I worked on Middle East issues, they were confused that I worked on Middle East issues, and some said to me, oh, I didn't know your people would be interested in the Middle East. I assumed you'd want to work on Asia issues. Mm. Is that something that I could potentially raise to an office like yours to be able to remedy and try to find ways that we can address these issues, make people more aware of that kind of challenge and what kind of hurtfulness that would be driven from that kind of word?
Yeah, if it was something short of an EEO complaint, because if it was, depending on the circumstances, you might better go to the Office of Civil Rights. But certainly that's one of the inclusion, that's microaggression is what it's called, and educating ourselves that, we're all on a journey, we can all microaggress against someone else. Yes, we do try and help.
Now, I just want to end here by just saying I was very proud of my time at the State Department, but there's a lot more work we need to do to try to fix these problems going forward. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Moran for 5 minutes.
Madam Ambassador, in your role as the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer within the State Department, who do you directly report to?
I report to the Secretary of State.
Do you have an executive team or a set of key leaders that you rely on to fulfill your duties on a day-to-day basis?
My team in my office,
Yeah.
yes.
How many would you say that is?
Oh, everybody in the office, so all 12 and
Okay.
any volunteers I can find.
Do you agree that strict adherence to federal employment law is imperative to effectively performing your duties in the role as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer?
Absolutely,
This is simply because you want to lead by example, correct?
absolutely.
I presume that the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to discrimination, harassment, and a hostile work environment. Is that true?
That is true.
Has anyone in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion or any of its key leaders, these 12 individuals you referenced, been the subject of any EEO complaints?
I would not be able to comment on that.
Tell me why you would not be able to comment on that.
From knowledge, so when it's in that process, then that is in that process, and
Aren't you notified when there's an EEO complaint with respect to any of the 12 individuals you mentioned?
as a responsible officer, yes.
So have you been notified of any EEO complaints of those 12 individuals or yourself with respect to their performance of duties in the State Department?
Yes,
Okay. Who was that?
am not at liberty to say that.
Well, that's interesting because you said in your commentary earlier, I wrote this quote down, I focused on transparency, inclusion, and accountability. And you said also, quote, we have eliminated confidentiality clauses. Did
That's
I
correct.
understand you correctly?
And if you continue with that quote, it says in the settlement what the outcome was.
All right.
I've
So I
not
didn't
been,
ask about
I've
the
not
out-
been informed of outcome.
I didn't ask about the outcome. I
Okay,
asked
right,
about
but I'm
who-
saying that's where removing the confidentiality provision, that's where that obtains.
Okay, so of those complaints that were filed, what were the outcomes of those complaints?
I have no idea.
You
I have not been informed.
you didn't take it upon yourself to understand how those complaints of EEO problems within your office were actually resolved?
So let me say this. My responsibility and desire is to maintain a workforce and an office that is absolutely free of any sort of discrimination, harassment, bullying, all of those things.
As a person, and I agree with that. I would
Right,
do the
so
same
I'm
thing.
saying that-
And as a person that would oversee only 12 individuals
Yes.
in their office,
Yes.
if I was running that office, I would want to know how those things were resolved.
And I'm saying to you that by law, first I have to follow the law, that I have not been informed of where the matter stands. The Office of Civil Rights has the lead.
Were you the subject of any of those EEO complaints?
Not that I know of, no.
Well,
I've
you
been
would
a-
know about that, wouldn't you?
Yes, so I'm reviewing.
So are you
yes.
100% certain that you were not the
Yes,
subject of any of those EEO
I am
complaints?
100% certain.
Has any of your supervisors in the State Department ever talked to you about changing your speech or conduct with respect to those that you supervise so that you do not get into a situation where you are in violation of the laws with respect to discrimination, harassment, or hostile work environment?
No,
Have you ever been counseled to change your speech with respect to the way you perform your duties at all?
no,
Have you ever been counseled to change your conduct at all?
no.
Have any allegations with respect to any EEO complaints or problems or allegations led to your departure later this month?
No.
Are you having any internal issues with any of those 12 individuals that led to your departure later this month?
No.
You mentioned earlier that you talked about the confidentiality clauses. Have you been a party to any confidentiality agreements or settlement agreements with respect to your speech or conduct while employed at the State Department?
No.
With respect to the budget, how much money is budgeted to settle any claims internally with respect to harassment, discrimination, or hostile work environment claims?
Within my office?
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely none.
Was any money expended last year with respect to that?
Absolutely not.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your time.
Of course.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Sherfulus McCormick for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being here.
Yes.
It's truly an honor to have you here, and thank you so much for your service. I wanted to start off with talking about the pipeline and recruitment. Congress and the department has placed significant focus on recruiting individuals from a variety of backgrounds from across the United States with recruitment events all over the country, fellowships designed better attractive individuals and historically excluded groups, and thanks to the provisions passed into law by Congress, offering a large number of paid internships at the department to create more opportunities for individuals from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Data studies conducted by GAO and the department and others suggest that these efforts have a positive impact on diversity at the entry level. It seems like there's an underlying assumption by our Republican counterparts that assumes that diversity and inclusion somehow diminishes or undermines excellence and merit. Could you please speak to the positive attributes, and does it in fact undermine excellence and merit when it comes to recruitment?
Well, I look at this committee as a wonderful example of a range of diversity of backgrounds, of views, of experiences, and how much richer the discussion has been because of it. The Department of State is exactly the same. In order to bring the widest array of recommendations, proposals, possibilities for solutions to the many, many challenges that our nation currently faces, we need a wide array of perspectives and views and lived experience and background to help us engage and serve the American people and our national security interests. That's just fact.
So then it's a fallacy that diversity and inclusion undermines merit and excellence.
Absolutely.
Also, I wanted to talk about the promotion and retention. Promotion and retention of lower-level staff has repeatedly been identified as significant challenges for the department, including as contributing factors for the lack of diversity at the mid and senior levels. Challenges posed by the diplomatic career on family and personnel, insufficient opportunities for skills development and career advancement, accountability for bullying and harassment, and efforts by previous administration to crack down on employees perceived to have differing political views have all contributed to this challenge. In response, the department set up a retention unit specifically tasked with looking at the obstacles to retaining talent and the department's investment in significant resources in developing the purpose-appropriate reforms. Promotion rates have repeatedly been identified by the GAO and various think tanks and former diplomats as shortcomings that have hamstringed the department's ability to retain a more diverse workforce and ensure that there are ample opportunities to access. Can you explain some of your work in the office is doing for retention?
So our office absolutely supports the retention unit, which is housed in Global Talent Management. It's in our HR department as opposed to ours. But we partner. Our climate survey certainly helped inform some of the questions that the retention unit is working from and on. We started a review of those who had already left the department that was funded by my office to help set that baseline. What questions need to be asked? Where are the challenges that people leaving prematurely, what are they finding? Because the reality is if people leave before we're getting our full muster from them, we are not using taxpayer money that it takes to train them, to house them, to send them around, to have them be excellent representatives of the United States. So we are working hard to fix our retention problem.
You started to speak a little bit about how it's difficult to be promoted, especially through the relationships. And as I've been traveling on different codels and spoke to different people, specifically the women have spoken about how difficult it is to be promoted. Now, these women were of all different backgrounds, all different colors. Could you please speak to why it's so difficult for them?
I can't speak to individual cases. We all have our own experiences and challenges, all of us, male, female, et cetera. You know, it may be that women traditionally take on that burden of managing family as well as profession, and in the Department of State, and particularly when you're traveling around the world, it is hard. We are looking into that specifically and in cooperation with one of our employee organizations as well.
Well, the women specifically talked about the ability to know about opportunities, how to execute jobs, just having the relationship with senior staff members.
Yes, so this is one of the ways that as a senior manager, when we talk about DEIA and what you can do about it, it is ensuring that you are connecting and supporting, developing your more junior staff, not because they remind you of you or that you went to the same school or come from the same state, but that you are being equitable in your counseling, in your mentoring, in your sponsoring, helping people get jobs, helping people get the training that will set them up for career progression. So these are things that we are looking for from our leaders and our mid-level managers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, I was looking at your name, and I just couldn't help but ask you, when you have to fill out those little forms, you have to put your initials in the bubbles. Do you run out of bubbles
I
before
do,
you
sir.
run out of name? What do? Do you just go around to the end
You know,
and just put it
I
on?
have I've been called. I stopped at Abercrombie-Winstanley, Abercrombie with just
Right.
BI, et cetera. Yeah.
My best friend in high school, or junior high school, his name was Christopher, and they ran out of names, and they would always call him out as Christ, and we always got a big
Okay.
kick out of
Well,
that.
that's not bad.
Being Baptist, we could laugh about that. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here. I go straight to my questioning. I wonder, would you agree that if this was true, that this would be illegal discrimination if people were not being hired at the State Department because they were told they were the wrong religion, they were disabled, or they were straight white men, that would constitute illegal discrimination?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, Chairman Mast actually wrote a letter to, he was then the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. That's almost like Congress. We give everybody these long titles, and I never understood why. To the Bureau's workforce regarding new assignments, and he reported that certain candidates could not be hired because they had a disability, they were white men, they were straight white men, or they are not of the right religion. None of that is legal, and none of it seems to comport to what the department regulations are. Would you care to comment on that at all?
I would say that that was taken out of context. That's not what it says, in fact. And the email, I did have the ability to see the letter, does say that those were things he had heard, not that those were things that were happening.
Okay. Would you
And he
mind
corrected.
corresponding with my office to correct that issue, please? I would really, or somebody in your group could do that.
We will take it back.
How much money does the State Department spend on DEIA advisors annually?
I would have to take that question back to get you an exact figure.
Okay, well, because this is a budget hearing, and I was told that-
Understood. But the advisors are often funded out of bureaus, not out of the central DEI funding. So they don't come out of my budget. And some advisors have full-time positions, and some advisors have 50%. So
Okay.
Yeah.
If somebody could get that to me, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate it, because this is a budget hearing, I was told.
Yeah.
You've requested $2.9 million for unconscious bias training. Can you explain to me what that would involve?
yeah, that funding is being requested by Global Talent Management. Again, it's not my office's funding. It is out of, I'm sorry, that would be FSI, sorry, the Foreign Service Institute, our training institute. And so that would be for the development of training, and they are doing a hard wash of everything that we're offering in the DEIA space. I can take it back and get from them specifically.
Okay, that'd be
You know, how
fine.
that breaks
I'd
down.
appreciate getting back to me again. Do the State Department employees earn more money if they engage in unconscious bias training?
No.
Okay. Is merit or race more important to consider when hiring for a State Department leadership
We
position?
hire for merit. We hire for merit.
I have a saying, put the best player in, coach.
There you go.
Does your office help counter some of the diplomatic efforts of our enemies?
Oh, I believe so, yes.
All right. Would you say it's a goal of your office to ensure State Department employees have access to gender transitioning surgery?
Your question, is it a goal of my office?
Yes, ma'am.
No.
Okay, but it is occurring, I assume.
I do not believe so, but I will take that back for our medical unit to specifically respond.
If you could, please.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I believe I'm just about out of town, and I will yield back the 32 seconds that you've so earned so graciously.
I thank you, Mr. Burchett, for yielding that 30 seconds back.
Precious
Chair.
30 seconds.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Dean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ambassador, it's a delight to have you here and to be talking about this important topic and the important work that you are doing. I have to say that for decades, my husband's in the bicycle industry, and for decades, he has talked about what diversity has done for his industry. Back in the day, when he first started out, it was a mostly men's club. But through his own hiring over the course of the last 25 years, he has said how his diverse workforce, more women, people of all different backgrounds, faiths, experiences, riding a bike or not, has improved what they do and has improved what they sell, frankly. The corporate world has been learning this over time. I have to say diversity in my own office has made my work better. I am confident of it. The more diverse people and experiences are around me, it just offers me such insights and such smarts, and I'm lucky to have a very diverse team. So you might imagine that I'm a little puzzled by some of the lines of questions that you are receiving. Let's start with budget. You have asked for, I think, the budget line item is just over $76 million, and as you say, I think most goes to the bureaus, 10% would go to your office directly.
Mm-hmm.
What would that budget look like, and what will it enable you to do in addition to the 2 hires you talk about?
Right.
Specifically, what would that enable you to do?
Yeah. So our projected spending would include $3.8 million on data projects. Some of the things that we've heard today, we might be taking a look at with that money. We also have had about 24 requests from Congress on various aspects of data. So we've got to put that together, and we want to be as responsive as possible. About $200,000 will be used to conduct a follow-up climate survey to see whether we've made improvements. I feel certain we have, but we want to document that we've made improvements from the first climate survey that we did. We will be purchasing a position for a staff assistant in the office. $900,000 will cover additional data analysts so that we can do the barrier analysis. At this time, we are at the mercy of where the data analysts sit in other parts of the building. So in order to be as efficient and as effective as possible. It's about $200,000 we have for travel. As you know, most of our workforce is overseas. We do as much as possible town halls via video, but answering questions, making sure people understand what this is about, that we are not trying to put one group or a different group at the top of the pyramid, that inclusion is for everyone. As we talk about the changes that we've made, the travel is necessary. We also fund a project called the CDIO Small Project Initiative, which is available to offices, to bureaus, to missions around the world for innovative projects that support DEIA. We've had things around the world like bystander intervention training, something I'm very enthusiastic about because it can be used in many different ways and gives people the tools in the moment to make a situation better. And then about $2 million for a national ad campaign. My deputy and I both were former Peace Corps volunteers. And I think she made the decision when she was 10. I made the decision to join Peace Corps when I was 11. And I made that decision from a commercial I saw that called it the hardest job you'll ever love, and held that in my head until I graduated from college and could join. So we know the importance of communicating the privilege to serve and how best to do it. So
I'll have to show that commercial to my 11-year-old granddaughter to inspire her.
Yeah.
You talked about, with the remaining time I have, the interviews of nearly 9,000 employees.
Yeah.
What are some of the greatest takeaways in terms of the barriers you're examining there?
yeah. Well, transparency and accountability are huge barriers for us that we are getting after. We've made the change with the senior assignments. We are changing as best practice how we do that hiring. That again, it's not because you know somebody or you worked with somebody that you get the job, that they are advertised and fairly competed, that we are clear and transparent about what we're looking for in individual positions so that people know the playing field is level and that they can advocate for themselves. And I do want to say very quickly, the first person to benefit from the change in the senior assignments was a white male who came to me and said, I may not be your demographic, but I benefited. And I said, you are. That I is inclusion. It means everybody.
I thank you for your service to our country at so many different times in your career, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ambassador. Do you feel that in the role that you're in right now, do you support self-identification?
Yes, I do.
And understanding that, if you were to have a group of males of Caucasian or any skin color who identified as a woman of color, would you describe that room as being a diverse room?
I can't even wrap my mind around that. I don't have an answer for that.
But that is actually what your department is about, is understanding diversity and equity
Yes.
and inclusion, correct?
Yes.
So, again, I ask my question. You believe in self-identification. If a group of males, Caucasian or any skin color, identifies as a woman of color, do you see that as a diverse room?
I do not believe that they would have to identify as a woman of color for it to be a diverse room. They
I
could have
absolutely
an
agree with that.
invisible disability. Yes.
So then to go follow up on that, is diversity defined by race and gender or by experience and ideology?
It's defined by many things. The executive order is a much broader definition than simply the classes that are protected under U.S. law. So we would start with the law, but it is much broader than that.
You see, you said that the Foreign Service Officers Test, one of the things that our process does not do is test for racist or sexist or homophobes or ableist. Those are the things that we need to be screening for. But let me be clear. I agree there shouldn't be any hateful people in the ranks of our State Department, our diplomatic services, or in government as a whole.
Okay.
I would strive to say that our endeavor would be to not have that anywhere in America.
Yeah.
But what I would say, however, and critically, is I think I speak for many Americans who have a good reason to believe that the State Department has a deeply misguided belief that hate is labeled and applied to anyone who has a disagreement in their ideology or the political affiliations. And see, just to be clear on that point, the differences in opinion or belief is not racist or sexist or ableist or any other type of labeling. And what you see is that when an individual disagrees, whether it be on his political opinions or things like this, he's immediately labeled based on his skin color that he is to have, as my colleague was pointing out, white privilege, right? And that is the immediate assumption. So I want to know, because you've talked about the fact that, and this is your quote, that we hire based on merit. If it's hired on merit, then why would we even need an office to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion if we're hiring by those who are most qualified?
The issue is access and inclusion, and
But access is granted by merit, correct?
access?
You
No,
submit your
no,
application, and if you're the
no.
most qualified, then
No, sir.
you should have it basically. But that's what we're looking towards, right? The idea of merit being the defining factor.
When I say access, for instance, one of the things that Congress has helped us do is pay our interns. I could not afford to be an intern at the Department of State. I come from Ohio. I had to work. So access.
And I completely get that as well, ma'am.
Okay,
I came
so
from a
let's talk-
broken family who,
Okay.
my mother and father, my dad spent 30 years in prison. My mom spent 7 years in prison. I bounced house to house until I was raised and finally adopted by grandparents after sleeping on couches of house neighbors and things like this. And He was a welder. My grandmother did hair as a beautician. We came from a below the average line of economics, which guess what? I sit here as a United States congressman, of which 11,500 on average is done in our entire history, not based on diversity, equity, inclusion, but on the ideas that equal opportunity exists thanks to America and the things that we fight for. I want to ask, what is the definition and difference between equity and equality?
There are many wonderful examples of how to describe the difference between the two. Equality is that you each are in a place and you get a ball with a target ahead of you. Equity is if you are smaller, weaker, you might be placed closer to the target.
See, I can answer that really quickly. My opinion of the difference between equity and equality is about equal outcome, and equality is about equal opportunity. And that the bottom line is that I would love to find out in my last few seconds how DEIA helps us win strategic competition when it comes to China, or push back on Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, or prevents nuclear Iran. You know, can you name one meaningful contribution that DEI efforts would make towards those priorities? And with that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
May I answer? Or?
Yes, ma'am, you may.
Oh, okay, all right. To have a wider array of experiences at the table as we grapple with these problems is going to help us come up with a wider array of options to address them. If you have the same people sitting at the table with similar backgrounds, similar experiences, you are going to have a very narrow range of options. That is why we're trying to broaden the aperture in that fashion. That is our belief. And as I said, I think this rich discussion today makes my point very, very well. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Liu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Mast. Thank you, Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley, for your public service. The State Department has had and continues to have certain policies that disproportionately and negatively impact minorities. And one of those policies were assignment restrictions that Representative Kim so eloquently talked about, where state employment employees would simply be given a notice they could not work on certain countries. And as far as Representative Kim could tell, it was just based on his race. And when we looked at the data, it did appear that certain groups, such as Asian Americans, were negatively impacted. I commend Secretary Blinken for eliminating all assignment restrictions on a going forward basis. I commend Secretary Blinken for eliminating half, actually more than half of the existing assignment restrictions. So my first question is to you is, I assume you agree with Secretary Blinken's policy changes?
Yes, absolutely.
And you would agree that having these policies in would have a negative impact on the State Department to attract the best and brightest, because if you believe that you were hampered from being able to work on a certain area of the world, you're never going to make it to the upper levels of management, correct?
I don't believe we have or should have second-class American citizens, so.
I appreciate your view and your comment on that. So let me ask you this. Why not remove all assignment restrictions right now? There's still some existing in the State Department.
I can take that question back to the department because my office is not involved in the discussions with DS on this particular issue. So I'd have to take that question back.
Thank you. Great, Richard, you could do that. And then if you could take another question back, which is this. The State Department has a separate process called pass-throughs, also known as assignment reviews, which would also restrict someone from working on a certain area or a certain country for a specific assignment. And I think some of their employee groups within the State Department are concerned that this is sort of a backdoor way to simply implement assignment restrictions. So if you could also take back the question of, we'd like to know how are these decisions being made, and why is this not simply a backdoor way of implementing assignment restrictions? And if we could get the answer to that, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
Question to you about trying to attract the best and brightest to the State Department. Does your office pay for advertising in media and so on to try to let people know about openings, or is that another office that does that?
Not my office, no.
Okay, but the State Department does do that, correct? Do they pay for sort of advertisements to try to let people know about openings?
I don't know, so I will take that question back. I assume everybody wants to come work for us. I don't know that we pay for it. I assume we do, but I'll take the question back.
Okay, and then if you could take another question back is, if the State Department in fact has a policy of spending money to try to get the word out, does the State Department then also advertise in various ethnic media sources?
Yeah.
And I'm just sort of curious how people know about State Department open positions. By the way, like you, I grew up in Ohio, never thought about the State Department, had no idea what it was. And I don't know how many Americans actually even know what State Department means. If you just sort of said those two words, I'm not sure a lot of folks would even have any understanding. And so just curious how the State Department does outreach to try to attract the best and brightest to the department.
I know that we do advertise. I mean, I see our advertisements on LinkedIn and other places. So again, it's the funding of it that I'm going to question. But yeah, I think it's really important that we do, and it is important that we get to Americans outside of our East Coast, West Coast, that we need people from all 50 states, and so we can do that.
So I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn, which is sort of interesting, because you also said something to that I did not know, which is you can join the State Department without a college degree. I think LinkedIn has a sort of a certain audience, and I'm just curious, how does a State Department reach out to people who don't have college degrees or who may not actually use LinkedIn or sort of traditional processes to try to find jobs? And if you get that back to us, that'd be great, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Perry for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In keeping on the same line of questioning, Ambassador, I wasn't really thinking of it, but with Mr. Liu's questioning regarding assignment restrictions, and I think his assertion that we seek the best and brightest, and I think you agree with that, is there a potential that someone that came from another country wanted to work in the State Department at the highest levels, like probably most people in the State Department do aspire to, could potentially jeopardize America's national security based on fractured allegiances? Is that a possibility?
Sir, sadly, I have to say that we've had Americans from every background compromise national security.
So it's a possibility. So there is a rationale for assignment restrictions, is what I think you're saying.
No, that's not what I said.
Okay, so can you clarify that?
I said there is already a history of Americans from every background compromising. So what I would say about those who are either first-generation Americans, second-generation Americans, 10th-generation Americans is the same.
So there is a reason for assignment restrictions based on the fact that people may compromise themselves in allegiance to some other country.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Ma'am, I'm looking at your quote here, and I'm assuming it says your name on it, Ambassador, so I'm assuming it's yours. And the one in the middle there where it says primarily European American men, this is who has the vast majority of senior positions. And then the last line is, that does not come about through merit. Is there any empirical data that you can provide to the committee that aligns with your assertion, that proves that assertion?
Well, as you'll see from the quote, it's not a full quote.
Okay,
So
that's why I'm asking you to...
does not come from merit alone.
Okay.
Okay.
So do you have any empirical data to buttress your assertion?
Just common sense and knowledge that women and minorities do not become less intelligent as we go up the ladder, that there are, in fact, challenges.
But the assessment that you're making there is primarily European American men. That's what you said.
But I'm stating a fact that the vast majority of senior positions
But why
are
is
held
that?
by.
But why is it because? It's because they're European American men. That's why. Because that's what you said. I'm just trying to hook cause and effect.
Yes.
You're saying that the cause
That
is that.
merit alone is not
Do you
how
have
that
again?
occurs.
Do you
Yeah.
have any empirical data whatsoever to support that assertion?
The surveys that we've done that lay out the challenges.
No, not surveys, ma'am. Numbers that prove your point. You're very pleasant and you're very knowledgeable, but but that's a pretty stark statement there, which essentially advocates for discrimination of certain individuals based on their heritage. And I'm just asking, I don't think you believe in that, but you said that, so I'm asking if you have any factual basis to make that judgment.
I don't think there's anything up there that says I intend to discriminate against anyone.
But that's what that says. That's
that
what
I
that
intend
says.
to discriminate?
That does not come about through merit.
Will the
That-
gentleman suspend for one brief moment? Suspend time. They accidentally reset the clock in the middle, so just so you know, your time will end at when the clock hits 2 minutes. Just
2 minutes,
be
okay,
aware
thank
that
All right.
the clock got reset somehow.
I was wondering about that because,
Yes.
but
So-
you know, I thought you were making up for the time that the ranking member took time from me when he was the chairman, but I've let that go a long time ago.
Gentleman may resume.
Apparently. All right. Well, thank you, ma'am. I'm wondering about the standards. Like, I think you say that we want the best and the brightest, and I would agree with you. Last year, the State Department announced changes to the Foreign Service standard, the test that everybody took prior to that.
No.
No one took. Okay, so can you elaborate? Not everybody took that test.
Absolutely not. As I said earlier, there are many within the Department of State who come through fellowships, who do a lateral transfer into the Foreign Service, who do not touch the Foreign Service written exam.
Okay, so fine. But for those who take the test,
Okay?
Is there any way to take the test, fail the test, and still be hired at the State Department once you fail the test?
Absolutely, and has been for a long time.
It has been for a long time. So did this changes to the test seek to ameliorate that situation, to fix that?
For a detailed answer, I would ask you to ask Global Talent Management, which led the changes and did the research about why it was appropriate to change the weight that the test has in someone proceeding with the process of applying to the Department
I
of
will
State.
yield, but I would just say that lowering the standard is not going to get us the best and brightest. And Mr. Chairman, I yield. I thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member Meeks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start out by recognizing Ambassador Abercrombie-Winstanley's service to our great country. I understand that after more than 30 years of working on behalf of the American people, you are retiring. And I also want to thank you for your coming back to serve the country as the State Department's first ever Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. So thank you for the work of the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Office, and the department has made significant progress in advancing a more inclusive workplace. We thank you for that. Your efforts benefit the entire workforce and its ability to deliver on behalf of the American people by ensuring that people with different experiences and histories are at the table, helping to develop a more innovative public policy solutions to the many challenges that the United States faces around the world. And, you know, since your appointment, we've seen renewed focus on developing solutions to address long-standing institutional barriers to establishing a State Department that is more representative of the America it serves, the America that I love, the America that I believe is still striving to become a more perfect union. And that's the America that we want to be represented throughout the world and throughout the various continents and all countries. You know, this has been something that has been tremendously important to me. You know, I've seen the progress that we've made in America. I can remember as a kid going to see, knowing that my father could not get a job in certain places just because of the color of his skin. I've seen with my own eyes getting off of a train and seeing whites onlys and Negroes only, when colored only is what they said, when I would travel south. So there's been improvement, but there's a lot of work to do. The challenges that's faced by our foreign affairs and national security agencies in creating a more diverse workforce, they're not new. They're not new. They're persistent for decades, and progress has happened, but it's slow. It's slow. And as you know, one of my key priorities has been to address recruitment challenges, but also the barriers to promotion to the mid and senior levels. These barriers have created challenges to retention of a diverse workforce and limited the department from fully leveraging their contributions over time. And guess what? In my years in Congress, I've worked with many administrations and many secretaries of states. Not only has it been Madeleine Albright or Hillary Clinton, but I've worked with Condoleezza Rice on the same problem. I've worked with Colin Powell on the same issues. Democratic administrations, and I've worked with the Trump administration. They acknowledged it. Yeah. Congress has played an important role in collaborating with the Department of State in advancing diversity and equity and inclusion and accessibility in various Democratic and Republican administrations. So the partnership has yielded real results. State now offers, as you've indicated, paid internships. It has expanded on how and where it offers the Foreign Service exam, accessibility. State has begun conducting exit interviews to understand why employees are leaving, and has stood up a retention unit so that it is able to retain the talent it has spent so much time and money to cultivate. Underpinning these changes is the use of comprehensive data. And while I am pleased by the progress that has been made, we know, you know, the work is not finished. Data continues to show that African Americans and Americans of Hispanic origin continue to be severely underrepresented at the senior levels of the Foreign Service. And I'm eager to hear more, Ambassador, on how the efforts of the CDIO efforts are advancing equity and inclusion at state and how we can address that in Congress. But I'm running out of time. And what I am concerned of is what's happening throughout the country and happening even at this committee's oversight, diversity, equity, inclusion work. What's happening is becoming wrongfully politicized and increasingly mischaracterized as progressive ideology or a contest between supposedly woke and anti-woke forces. Successive administrations have recognized the importance of increasing diversity as well as fostering a culture of equity and inclusion to better enable the State Department to deliver on its national security mission. That's what this is about. That's making America better, moving better, showing the world the example of the United States of America and its inclusion and diversity. And I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member. Chair now recognizes Mr. Davidson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Ambassador, you're here today. I just say, under your leadership, the State Department's implemented its DEIA strategic plan last September, announcing that part of its implementation would be, quote, establishing the advancement of DEIA as an element for all employees as part of their job performance criteria, career advancement opportunities, and senior performance pay. Why do you believe it is appropriate or necessary for every single State Department employee to be evaluated on advancing the DEIA framework?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I do want to acknowledge the truth of what Congressman Meeks said, which is that this work started before this administration. DEIA, as part of the measure of being prepared for promotion, for leadership in our organization, has been part of our precepts since 2018. The prior administration had it included. It was not a standalone. It was woven in and among other aspects of good management.
I'll grant you, I mean, some of the ideas probably go back to Rudy Deutsch and the Long March Through the Institutions. But why do you believe it's important? I don't want a history lesson. I want to know why you think it's important that every single employee has this tied to their employment at the State Department.
Too many members of our State Department family have not felt the full value of their contributions, of belonging to our organization. As you know, we have a well-earned reputation of exclusivity, and that means excluding people. So everyone
I actually don't know that. Frankly, I think that the 14th Amendment is applied for a long time. We've had non-discrimination policies for a long time. We've had merit-based entrance requirements for a long time. Frankly, you were talking to my colleague, Mr. Perry, okay, so he pointed out that since 1924, there's been a Foreign Service officer test. And recently, the department decided, yeah, you don't actually need to pass the test. Why do you believe that somebody that knows that this is a test that's required, that has all kinds of opportunity to prepare for the test, that fails the test, why do you believe they're probably still one of the best and brightest, maybe the right people to hire for the job, even if they can't pass a gateway test? It's supposed to assess merit, right? Were they messed up from 1924 until your arrival on the scene?
The test has changed several times since 1924, number one. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, there are many people for many years who have joined the Department of State Foreign Service without taking the test. It has never been something that every single person in the Foreign Service has passed or even taken. We've had a variety of ways of joining the Foreign Service. So this change allows a more holistic. Okay.
Okay. So you want to give me more history on it, and your change is holistic. You didn't talk about changing the test. You talked about it's okay if you fail the test. You didn't say we need a test that actually incorporates things that we're somehow missing. We've looked in the field, and apparently people don't realize that the State Department actually needs to be focused on accomplishing the national security interests of the United States of America. So we should laser focus it. You might use the test to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't pay attention to what, how many rainbow flags and BLM flags you can fly on our pole. You might pay attention to how that will play with the Vatican. Instead, you guys fly these flags at the Vatican. Did you coordinate with the Vatican prior to flying flags that are hostile to the doctrine of the Catholic Church?
The decision to fly or not fly a flag is a chief of mission decision, but we should remember that the written test is always been part of the exam, not the final.
Was the decision to fly the flag coordinated with the Vatican?
I will take that question back for the record.
Do you believe it should have been?
We are a sovereign nation, and we make our own decisions.
Yeah, well, we have an embassy there where we're supposed to build our relationship with countries, and you see places like Guatemala or Hungary where the approach for the United States is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, every kind of ideology in terms of LGBTQ plus spectrum that is hostile to the values of the cultures that we're trying to reach. Is that advancing our national security interests?
We adhere to our own values.
You got your own values, not America's.
America's values. When I say we, I mean America.
Gentlemen's time has expired. We'll roll into a few more questions in a second round here for both sides. I'll begin by yielding myself 5 minutes, ma'am. And I want to ask this. On the State Department website, it talks about expanding ways for employees to self-identify in the talent management system. Can you explain what that is? The expanded ways for employees to self-identify?
Sure. By law, we have to identify certain characteristics of our employees.
Which ones?
Race, certainly. It may be disability. I can double check for you, for the record, everything that we have to ask, but race is certainly one of them by law. people applying to the Department of State provide that information. If they don't, then the agency is required to supply the information.
If I don't answer what I am, you're going to say what I am.
By law,
What would
we
you say that
are
I?
required.
Going back to my previous line of questioning, what would you? How would
Luckily,
you,
that is not my decision. Ask Global Talent Management. That's not mine. So we want people to be able to say who they are. And
But if we don't, then state will decide what I am.
by law,
Certainly something for us to look at, no doubt. I want to continue on this line of questioning. Again, going off state's website, core component of the department's DEI plan is establishing the advancement of DEI as an element for all employees as a part of their job performance criteria.
Yes.
How is DEI job performance criteria? How do you evaluate? And let me ask this maybe a little bit more specifically. I said it before. If somebody uses the wrong pronouns, is that a negative hit on them? If an individual believes that a man can't be a woman or a woman can't be a man, is that a hit on their DEI job performance criteria? Am I missing the mark on that? Tell me a little bit about it.
I believe we either are working on, have recently put out, OPM has put out a policy on the use of pronouns and does urge that the desired pronoun of the individual be used.
But
There's
is this
no-
a
there's-
hit on their, the establishment of job performance criteria, an employee being evaluated, job performance criteria,
I
career
will
advancement opportunities?
It may be, I cannot say, because I would not, it does contribute to, it can contribute to a hostile work environment, according to OPM, so that's there. It might be a performance, it might be a conduct issue, so I cannot say definitively that that would have, I cannot say definitively what impact that would have.
You used the term previously, microaggression. Is it microaggression to use a pronoun that somebody is not but asks to be called?
That would depend on the individual. Some things that I don't get bothered by, other people do. So it's an individual
So this comes down to what
assessment.
somebody reports. If somebody reports
No,
it as microaggression, I don't know that that's a real report, but okay,
yeah.
that would be.
It might just, I urge people bring their best selves to work, the things that are going to help people stay focused on the job at hand.
Have you made State Department more diverse?
I hope I've made it more inclusive. To become more diverse does indeed take time. The civil service, people don't turn over every day, every week, or every year for that matter.
Good things
So
take time. Have you made it more diverse?
I can't say that, so can't say that.
You don't know if you've succeeded in making it more diverse.
Don't know that the department, the work of the department, again, it's not just me, it's all of us, have made it more diverse. What I do hope we've done is communicate clearly to every American who's got the ability and desire to serve that we are a good place to come and do it.
How will you know if you've made it more diverse? Or how will your replacement know if they've made it more diverse according to your metrics? Where will they
They will
read this,
find it
decide
from
this?
our demographic baseline report and our climate surveys. Not only who's working for us, but how they feel about working for us.
I thank you for answering my questions today. My time has nearly expired. I will recognize Ranking Member Crow for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to pick up on the line of question and some of your answers about how a more inclusive workplace and how leveling the playing field makes us safer and actually furthers the mission of the State Department in the best interests of the American people. And one of those has been a lot of discussion around race and ethnic background, but also gender is a very important part of the mission of your office. And there's there's been a lot of efforts in Congress actually around this, and I'll give a lot of credit to my friend Mr. Waltz, who actually is a founding co-chair of the Women, Peace, and Security Caucus in Congress. There's actually a recognition that getting women involved in reducing some of the systematic barriers to getting women involved in peace and security actually makes us stronger. And I couldn't agree more with that effort, and give Mr. Waltz a lot of credit for helping lead that and open the aperture, if you will, for women in peace and security. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that and hear from you, Ambassador, on some of the efforts of your office on gender equity within the department and some of the successes you've had in that regard.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and thank you. Certainly, the role of women everywhere is important, and in the Department of State. So we, support the work of the retention unit, because we do anecdotally believe that we lose women in higher proportion than men. So we're looking at that. We're looking at the drivers of attrition and how we can retain women. We've also stayed in very close touch with the executive women at State who focus on these issues as well. A very recent policy, and it may seem small to those who do not go and work in classified areas overseas, but we all do when we go to missions, to embassies, to consulates, as well as in the department, classified workspaces and lactation devices, motherhood, and making it easier to be a mom and take care of your child while working, and that is a lactation device that is allowed into the classified spaces. This was a huge push. It was something that was very clearly stated by the women in our organizations. That's something that either they have need now, or may need in future, and want to make sure that they don't have to make career decisions based on whether they're going to be overseas or not. So that's something that's been really important. One of the things we're looking at, of course, is housing. A couple of things. One, to ensure that every mission has a house that is accessible, depending on what our employees need. And my staff has worked really hard on working with other bureaus in the department to put that together. Bathrooms that are accessible, that are all gendered, single use, all gendered, and also have water in them for ablution or other purposes that can be used for any number of groups within the department that help them do their jobs better with fewer distractions, fewer time delays. So we will look for what comes out of the retention unit to take additional steps from there. But absolutely making sure that we all can do our jobs without additional burdens and distractions is a focus.
Thank you for that. And you've had a career that spanned over 30 years at the department. I would love to just hear from you in the final time that we have on how the landscape has changed for women at the department over the last 3 decades.
Oh my goodness. Well, nobody thinks I'm their secretary anymore, so that is a wonderful change, I must say. One of the challenges still is that you can walk into a room and see few women inside, so that hasn't changed as much as I would have liked, but I also walk into many rooms where there are half of the room is female, and that means that we are really getting the people in place that should be there. We have a lot to contribute. I'm a NEA hand, so NEA has always been forward-leaning with sending women around the world, trusting our capabilities, our language ability, our cultural effectiveness. As you know from my bio, I was the first woman to lead a diplomatic mission in Saudi Arabia. It was an amazing challenge, and one that the Bureau, the Department of State, said, you can do this, you can represent us. And that privilege is something that is unmatched, even by being a U.S. ambassador, the top job. But that ability to show who we are as a nation, and that we say your ability determines your destiny, doesn't get better than that. So,
thank you. My time has expired.
thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the ranking member for his words. I've served in countries all over the world where women aren't disadvantaged, they're brutalized. And I've seen that where women thrive in societies and villages and in countries, so does that country. But at the same, and grew up under a single mom who broke barrier after barrier to provide a better life for me. At the same time, that same woman who broke all of those barriers was quite offended when a classmate of mine who was African American got a scholarship. I didn't. She had a lower score than I did, even though this classmate came from a very financially well-off background, and we certainly did not. We used to have to sell things to afford grocery money. So I think what we're going back to, and I think the disconnect here, and that you'll find with the thrust of your program and in my experience and Representative Mills, is what we're talking about really is poverty and how we address that. So you mentioned 80% of the Deputy Assistant Secretary's first senior line of management were European American. That was a problem, at least in how I characterize your words. You've now opened it up, fully agree with that. What do you do, what does your office do systemically then if you compete those positions and you're still at 80% European American?
Well, no, it's not because we were secretive about how we put the
Sure,
position
got it.
up
Let's
there.
move beyond that.
Yeah,
Competition,
but-
good thing.
But yes, but remember, the I is inclusion. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying equal outcome. I'm not saying that we're going to arrive at a specific number of people anywhere. We just want to make sure the playing field is level.
Okay, I think one of the issues
Yeah.
is Vice President Harris,
Yeah.
when asked about the difference in equality and equity, said, I quote, "Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place." So a lot of people in this space are saying equity means equal outcomes. And if some people aren't starting in the same place, then we provide them more resources than the others so that we all end up with equal outcomes. And in an exclusionary environment, in an elite environment, whether it's in the military or the State Department where we need the best of the best, you can't square that circle to end up all in the same place. Do you disagree with that characterization? I take it that you do. From Vice President Harris, it said, quote, "Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place."
That isn't how I would define it. But let me tell you something I've learned because I sit on the committee.
But you have the first,
Yeah.
I don't know how she identifies actually, but first Vice President of color saying this is her definition of equity.
Okay.
As the president signing DEI executive orders.
Yeah.
So let's get that squared away, because that's my concern, is that I don't see how you have everybody end up in the same place. Frankly, a lot of the folks in this place also have Marxist backgrounds. You can agree or disagree with it. They do. In terms of equal outcome for all is a key definition of communism and Marxism. I mean, and that is a concern.
I don't even know what to say about the Marxists,
Okay.
but I will point out, and something that I say often, is that everybody doesn't want to end up in the same place. Everybody doesn't want to be a U.S. ambassador. I never wanted to be Secretary of State. So it's never going to be we end up in the same place. You will hear me say again and again, desire plus ability. You need both of those.
So let's go back to the Deputy Assistant Secretaries.
Okay.
You competed. You
Now-
end up with 80%. You didn't give me a real answer.
No.
Or
that
if you do.
80% was when it wasn't advertised and competed.
And what is it now?
So I will check.
How would you not know? I mean, this was a key achievement. You listened. You
The
listed
key
as your
achievement
office.
was transparency and leveling the playing field. Now, the results of it, I will
So
check
let me
and see, because
posit
we.
this, and
Go
this
ahead.
is, I think, it's part of the crux of our issue. I grew up poor as dirt. He grew up bouncing from home to home. Probably most people would describe us as, in your words, European American, white. But yet that was an issue. That's an issue if something is overwhelmingly white, or people of color are underrepresented by ill-defined statistics that I don't think we can get from you. And from our perspective, we earned it. I mean, we exceeded all kinds of odds. But yet a lot of people in the space would tell us we're privileged because of our skin color. I didn't feel privileged growing up. People in the poorest county in Florida don't feel privileged at all. And so how long do we atone for the sins of the past with the current generation is a very key question. And we can't fight discrimination from the past or even discrimination today with more discrimination. And that is, you will always hear from us as a fundamental issue that we will seek to fight against. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Mills for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Ambassador, in an interview with Foreign Policy magazine, you stated that you're going to reward it or you're going to hold people accountable for not doing it with regards to DEI. Can you please explain what that means and how is it being rewarded and how are people being held accountable?
So it is my strong belief that DEIA is an essential element of good management and leadership. It means getting the best out of all of your people. It means putting in place a level playing field so that those with desire and ability can serve and do it well without distraction. Because that's what, whether it's microaggressions or discrimination, harassment, bullying, all of these toxic work issues, it's distraction from the job at hand.
Now, I noted that you continue to punt towards the Office of Global Talent Management, and you list building a diverse workforce as a key focus and is demanding the bulk of the department's request. Again, you're asking in the fiscal year 24 for a $76 million budget, but you're actually allocating $55 million, the bulk of that, over to the Office of Global Talent Management. But my question is why should Congress fund an office that many Americans believe is counterproductive to the mission of the State Department, which is to protect and promote the U.S. security, prosperity, and democratic values through international policy?
I would say probably lack of understanding of what we do and how well we do it. We are a convener. We bring together, looking into issues. As I said, we don't resolve specific problems, but we bring together the different elements within the building, provide. An example, of course, is this Deputy Assistant Secretary change, where it was my office that led the improvement of transparency and accountability, leveled the playing field for that. That process has been in place presumably for many years. That is what we found to be the case when we arrived. Global Talent Management has been around forever, other bureaus, and so they didn't get after it. We are looking at it. This is our job to ensure, to look after where the playing field is not level. No one else has that specific focus and portfolio.
And I apologize, but lowering the standards on test evaluations, for example, isn't getting the best and brightest, as has been pointed out. And I will also say that, you know, I sit on the House Armed Services Committee as well as this committee here in the Foreign Affairs. And it's very clear that the DOD, for example, has seen recruitment shortages. And the Biden administration has continued to look at their focuses on being DEI in our military or in our departments, or ESG with in regards to corporations, or CRT with regards to our children. And we're seeing where this is a huge deficit as a whole. I can tell you, you can't combat racism with racism, regardless of skin color, gender, or political affiliation and ideologies. And I can tell you that for me, the Department of State should be focusing its security on the ideas of prosperity, Democrat values, international diplomacy. And that's why I think that what they're trying to do within your department and within the Office of Global Talent Management is not only counterproductive and contrary to American goals, but I myself would never vote in favor to allocate a single dollar towards these types of things that I find to be divisive. And so I can tell you, with my remaining time, which I will be handing back over because I don't think there's any further discussion to be had, I wish you well in your retirement, but I can assure you that not a single American tax dollar will be voted on by me to continue to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion, as opposed to promoting meritocracy and America's equal opportunities. With that, I yield my time.
May I answer?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Thank you. I would ask the congressman to consider that since factually there are many people who have come through to senior positions, successful, productive careers without taking the written exam, if anyone could be identified, who knows who took The exam or what score they got is not a predictor of success. It is part of the process. I have been an examiner. I led the oral assessment, and so know the people who got through the written exam, who got through the essays, who got through the qualitative evaluation paragraphs. I forget what the P stands for. It is a whole process, not just a written exam. And I know that you don't know who took it and who didn't. You can't judge someone's success on that. You can't judge. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. I hope you take away from the questions that we've asked as much as we take away from the answers that you've given. Your testimony was valuable, and members, they will have some additional questions for you, I have no doubt. And we ask that you respond to those questions in writing when you get those, or your office. I now recognize Mr. Crow for any closing remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Chairman, for calling this really important meeting, hearing today. I just wanted to address a few points that were raised, a few themes that were discussed today. There was a lot of discussion by some of my colleagues about their own personal struggles, which are real, and I understand those. You know, I actually share many of those. I also grew up without a lot of money and bounced around from a lot of different houses, and that's something that I've had to overcome. But there's a lot of things I also have not had to overcome that other people have had to, that don't have a background like me. And there's this notion that I think is really important to this debate that we're having as a nation right now, a larger national debate, about the nature of struggle and rights. And I would just like to say that it is just not true that when you recognize somebody else's struggle or somebody else's rights, that doesn't detract from yours. They're not a fixed pie. We can, as a nation and as a society, recognize that other people have struggles and face barriers that we don't, and that does not detract from our own individual struggles. It just doesn't. We can do that. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think that's really important as a society that we come to a better understanding of that point so that we can actualize our full potential. The other theme was about what some people have classified as, and I'll quote, sins of the past, end quote. I wish they were of the past, but they're not. And I know so many people know that, and Ambassador, you know that better than I do, but we are still dealing with so many of these things. We see it day in and day out. That struggle is very much a part of our present, and we need to have an honest discussion about it. So no, this is not the sins of the past. We have not dealt with so much, and we need to. And the work that you have done over your career and in your office has been at the forefront of that. The third is just the national security component here, and actually the foreign policy component. There were a lot of folks who say this is a distraction, this is money that is not well spent, that it's somehow diverting our ability to deal with great power competition or address Iran or China or Russia. And I couldn't disagree more with that assertion, and you outlined it very well, Ambassador, that the more experience we have at the table, the more lived experience, the more people that fully represent the diversity and the power of this country, the more options we'll have, the more ideas we'll have, and the better results we will achieve in meeting those threats. And I thank you for outlining that in a very compelling way. So thank you for your over 3 decades of service to your country. I admire that, I respect that. You have served the nation and the department with dignity, with respect, and have advanced our foreign policy, our national security, and the lives of people within the department. And I wish you well in your well-deserved retirement. Thank you, and I yield back.
Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitations. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Take care.
Yeah, you